Well, good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all here to this evening's event for the launch of the Mapping the Humanities website. This is the culmination of 18 months' work for the project team. And over that period, they have mapped over 3,000 pieces of arts and humanities research infrastructure across the UK. And it has been the most extraordinary project that we've discovered so much about the incredible environment in which we all work. And the resource, the map, reveals the extraordinary diversity of our research infrastructure, made up of all of these incredible institutes, centres, hubs, research clusters, networks, professional, learned and scholarly societies, incredible labs and facilities that we have. And it provides unique insight, really for the first time, into the shape of the arts and humanities, often hidden research infrastructure in the UK. So this evening, we celebrate and mark the official launch of this exciting new resource. So this evening, we will include a demonstration of the map and a panel discussion reflecting on what the map reveals about our research landscape. And we'll look ahead to what's next for infrastructure and the humanities. So thank you so much, first of all, to the team who produced the map and have worked so hard across the past years to bring this to life. And of course, to the funders of this project, to Research England and to the AHRC. And to introduce the project, I'm going to turn now to Christopher Smith, Chief Executive of the AHRC, to say a few words about the project and its significance.
Hello, I'm Christopher Smith, the Executive Chair of the Arts Humanities Research Council, and I'm absolutely delighted to be welcoming the launch of the School of Advanced Studies Mapping Humanities project, which we have funded alongside Research England. When we think about infrastructure for the arts and humanities, for a long time now, we've thought a lot around libraries, whether they be physical or digital. And the library remains an absolutely critical resource and a laboratory for us in arts and humanities. But increasingly, we've needed to think about infrastructure in different ways. So we know, for instance, that demands on a digital infrastructure from arts and humanities are increasing, and that we are developing projects which are putting really interesting demands into data infrastructure. And AHRC, alongside other funders, beginning to work more to support that kind of activity. We're also funding infrastructure for world-class labs in parts of arts humanities, so equipment and kit that is needed in order to pursue at its most efficient, effective and high level the kinds of work we do. So for instance, major investment in archaeological equipment in Bradford that we made recently. What we've thought about rather less, I think, is the infrastructure of our institutions, of our institutes and centres, and the way that can take us towards more effective collaborative working. Now, a lot of arts and humanities is done through individual researchers working with the infrastructure of libraries and archives and all the other things which we have, but essentially on their own. But there is also a lot of work that can only be or can only best be done in teams. And institutes and centres have traditionally been a place where that kind of work can happen, and to huge effect. I've seen it in my own University of St Andrews, and everybody in this webinar will have seen it in their own institutions. But it has been incredibly difficult to join up those institutes and centres to create something of higher scale. One of the reasons why we were so keen to see this Mapping Humanities exercise is to give us a picture of the landscape, to interrogate whether that landscape is actually fit for purpose, and to have the tools and the evidence with which to improve the situation of the landscape that we have. For instance, it's very likely, I think, that what we'll see out of this is a very high number of institutes and centres across the UK. That is a sign of vitality, and it is also evidence of one of the uses that QR money is going to, and QR is so critical to arts and humanities activity. But it's also a resource that we need to steward with care. And so we need to be able to show that the kinds of activities that are happening in our institutes and centres are genuinely amounting to the underpinning, the infrastructural underpinning of arts and humanities as flourishing research enterprises. So I think that this is an extraordinarily important moment for us to be able to see our landscape in a new way. It's almost like one of those moments where you see the earth from a different vantage point. Now, having this new vantage point is great in itself, and I'm delighted that the relationship that we have with School of Art Studies depends and is predicated on their maintaining this resource, and I think we should all lean in to ensure that it's kept up to date, maintained, and that it remains fit for purpose. So this isn't something that sits on a shelf and goes out of date instantly, but it is sustained. But it also demands now a really serious interrogation. What does the future of arts and humanities institutional infrastructure look like to give us the best opportunity to maximize resource, to acquire more resource, to demonstrate our efficacy as research enterprises? I think we've got a real opportunity here to see not just the points on the map, but to draw the lines between them, to move, as it were, from individual nodes to a genuine network. And if we can get that right, we can start to build those networks, build scale, build teams, then that gives us an even stronger argument than what we already have to work in some parts of arts and humanities for some purposes at a greater scale. That is a really interesting opportunity for us, and it can only happen as a result of data which has been gathered by this project, and that can in the end go on to inform things like REF, but also things like funding choices for UKRI. So I really welcome this project. I'm really excited to see what questions we choose to ask with this data and what the answers lead us to in terms of future funding, future research, and indeed future innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christopher, and thanks to the HRC and to Research England again for making this project possible. As you can see, as Christopher said, this is both a map that helps us find one another, but it's also the starting point for a wider conversation around research infrastructure more broadly. And we'll come on to that after we've heard from Megan Bushnell, who is one of the principal architects of the map and who has been leading the team collecting this data. She'll give us a demonstration of what the map can do, its functionality, and how you can use it. Megan.
Thank you for that, Joe. And hello, everyone. And thank you all so much for joining us today to celebrate the launch of the Mapping the Arts Humanities project. Just give me a moment. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. There we go. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to provide you with a really brief overview of what our data collection process has entailed. And then I'm going to, as Joe said, I'm going to provide you with a brief demonstration of the site. Now, for those of you who joined us for the town hall that we had a few months ago, I really apologize that some of this material will be quite familiar to you already. For that reason, I'm going to try and make this first bit quite brief so that we can then get on to the really exciting bit, which is, of course, the website. So as Christopher Smith has already touched upon, we have a very specific idea of what infrastructure entails for this project. Infrastructure is usually referring to structures necessary to support and enable research, and it can include things like libraries, museums, archives, and so on. However, as Christopher noted, for the arts and humanities at its core, the necessary unit for research is people. So for this project in particular, we've interpreted infrastructure as collaborative structures, such as research institutes, centers, groups, learned societies, and independent research organizations. In the future, we'd also really like to include other things, but for now, we really wanted to prioritize these kinds of infrastructure because they have not been cataloged before. And of course, we only had 18 months to get this up and running. In addition, we also needed to think quite carefully about what we mean by the arts and humanities to make sure that we had a really rich but also relevant data set. Since this project has been commissioned by the HRC and Research England, we are guided very much by their remit and their subject classifications. So these include subjects that you would expect, like history, classics, languages, literature, visual arts, but it also includes subjects that are also covered by the ESRC in some capacity, such as political science, development studies, and law. Our approach, therefore, is tended to be as inclusive as possible because we really want to find the things that people normally do not see. We really want to highlight interdisciplinary activity. Our data collection process had 4 phases. We started by manually combing through university websites to identify relevant infrastructure per the definitions I've just given you. And once this infrastructure was identified, we went onto each infrastructure's webpage and we collected information directly from there. We collected, as Joe noted, over 3,000 pieces of infrastructure. However, this isn't even everything that is out there. We definitely know there's more. We unfortunately just had to stop because we were running out of time. The next step, which we've just been going through the past few weeks, is we've been inviting all of the infrastructure representatives to register on our site and review their data. All of the information we've collected is publicly available. However, there's also the risk that might be out of date. So we'd like to give everyone the opportunity to opt out of the project if they do not wish to be involved, and also to verify and update their data so that we can really ensure that we have the highest quality data set possible. In the future, the next step, of course, will be we hope to keep on updating all of our registered users to remind them that they need to, periodically revisit their data and continue updating it. And this way, we hope to have a resource that remains relatively up to date and usable and really rich for the entire community. In terms of the information we've collected, we recorded, of course, the infrastructure's name and a description of its activities straight from the infrastructure's webpage. We've recorded its website URL to help direct users onto the infrastructure's home webpage as quickly as possible. We've collected a contact email and address, a university affiliation, if there is one, a parent organization, if it's nested inside another infrastructure, as well as research partners, any research partners we could identify, and funding sources. These are kind of the core data fields that we try to populate. If the information is available, we've also collected things like the founding year of the infrastructure and social media handles. But again, just to reiterate, all of this information has been things that have been publicly available online. In addition to this information, we've also assigned various subject tags to every infrastructure to really help users find what is relevant to them. So the tagging system has been designed to be responsive and accurate, and it consists of 3 tag sets. The first is made up of the AHRC's funding categories, which include things like archaeology and classics and cultural museum studies. These are primarily used in the data entry. The second set are project-created tags, which introduce new tags to capture current research trends, such as digital humanities, environmental humanities, medical humanities, and so on. These have been combined with a flattened and simplified version of the AHRC tags to create subject filters on the website. The third set are user tags, which users will be able to create for themselves when they verify their data, so that they can describe their infrastructure using the most appropriate language. These will be very, very flexible, and they should assist in keyword searches. You can use user tags that other users have nominated, and the most productive user tags will be promoted to being project tags to kind of help make emerging trends in the data more prominent and easier to find through search. The overall effect will be that the data will be organized by an established framework, so it can speak to other established data sets organized using the same tag set, i.e. the AHRC's tag set, but it will also have enough flexibility to adapt to new developments and accurately represent what's the current state of the field. Thank you for bearing with me through all of that. That's the that's the dry data stuff done and dusted. I'm now going to introduce you to the website. And here it is. It is now live. You can all navigate to it now unimpeded. The URL is www.humanities.org.uk. This is the homepage, obviously. This website was designed, by the way, with help from the web developers Studio 24, who have been absolutely fantastic. And they really helped us design this website to prioritize accessibility, reliability, usability, and legibility. So this page is relatively lightweight, so it should run reliably no matter what kind of machine you're using, whether it's the most expensive one or the cheapest you could find. It's designed to be very readable and with high contrast, but still really attractive. And really, it's designed to get you into the data with as few obstructions as possible. So the first thing you can do on this website is immediately perform a keyword search, if you would like. You can also go immediately to the map, which is what we're going to do right now. So this is a map showing all of our mapped infrastructure so far, or at least all the ones that have an address. Some of what we've captured is not physical infrastructure at all. You can zoom in on the map. Sorry, all the zoom buttons are in my way. There we go. You can zoom in on the map, and then you'll see all of these groupings of infrastructure will split, so you can see a bit more detail. Let's see, this is one infrastructure here. So this is the Thomas Hardy Society. So you can actually click on that link and you will get to go and see the Hardy Society's detail page, which contains information such as a description of its activities, what kind of funding it offers to early career researchers and students, founding year, contact details, and so on. Other things you can do on the map include you can filter the map by various types. So say you only want to see university-based infrastructure, which counts for the majority of our infrastructure, then you could do so. Let's see what changes that makes. Or if you want to see things that are maybe not quite so common, you could search for other. You can also search for independent research organizations, and you can mix and match. These are radio buttons, so you can select many at a time. If you know what you're looking for, you can also try searching up here. So we can try searching for the School of Advanced Studies. Although actually, that seems to be giving us very strange results. I'll have to talk to the web devs about that particular function. But apart from that, that's kind of the map in a nutshell for the moment. Aside from perusing the map to find various infrastructures, you can also search our database. And you have various means of searching. You can search by keyword, for instance, things like medieval literature. You'll get some substantial results. And then you can also filter these results by a variety of filter options. So again, we have these general type categories that you can filter by if you want to only see things based on university and so on. You can also filter by specific type. So if you want to see just centers, for example, or clusters or collectives and so on, you could filter it that way. We've got this special feature for students and early career researchers who maybe are specifically looking for their next position, their next funding opportunity. So we can filter by funding options as well. And you can filter by university affiliation as well as project tag. So these were the kind of tags I was talking about before. So we could look at things like book studies. Let me just clear all the filters first. Filter that way and add in book studies, and we can see what we get. And there you have it. So this gives you multiple ways of searching for things. In addition to these search features, we have provided a lightweight dashboard, which shows some basic visualizations to give you a general insight to the data to potentially springboard your search. So this first visualization is a pie chart just showing the distribution of the various AHRC subject categories within our data set. As you can see, we have a fairly nice spread. We also have this visualization, which we're really proud of. I'm just gonna have to zoom out my screen a little bit so that you can fully see it. This is a network graph showing the parent and partner relationships that we've mapped between all of our various pieces of infrastructure. And what you can do is you can select various things, various dots, and you can see what those dots represent. In this case, it's the living text group. Again, you can click on it and you'll be taken to the detail page. And then finally, the last one we have on here is a timeline of the creation of these various pieces of infrastructure based on founding year. So you can see how much it's really taken off since the year 2000. Now, as a general caveat, these visualizations are really only as good as the data we have, and we don't have complete data sets for things like founding years or indeed partnerships. So I really, really encourage you all to add information and help us enhance this data set to make it as rich and useful as possible. For those of you who are really interested in this data set and seeing what you can get out of it, I'd also encourage you to check out our API. So we've built an API as part of this project. An API is an application programming interface, which is basically an intermediary that allows two applications to talk to one another. So in the case of our website, our API allows users to query the data on the Mapping the Arts Humanities website through various other programming languages, such as Python, for example. It essentially allows users to access our data in its raw form en masse, which can be really helpful for analyzing the data on a large scale and creating more high-functioning complex visualizations than those on the dashboard that we've presented here. As you've probably seen, the data on the website has been presented in a way that's optimized for searching, not necessarily for analyzing the data, and that's where the API really comes into its own. And I'm just going to quickly show you some examples of what you can maybe create using this API. So this is a visualization that my team and I created. This is a network graph that's a bit similar to the one that we saw on the dashboard. However, instead of looking at specific pieces of infrastructure, it's grouped infrastructures by their type, and then mapped their hierarchical relationships. And this is potentially really quite useful for understanding what's the distinction between all these various words that we use to describe infrastructure. For example, as you can see, we've got kind of these two great big clumps of relationships that are happening between center and institute and group and center. And what this is basically describing is a kind of taxonomy where groups tend to be inside of centers, which tend to be inside of institutes. This is something that I think sort of intrinsically we all maybe kind of suspected, but this kind of visualization is quite helpful for teasing those kind of semantic distinctions out. Another visualization that we've created, this was created by my colleague Marco Dossi. This was created in Tableau. This is a time-lapse map of the same data that was on the dashboard, that timeline of when various infrastructures have been created. So the API, as you can see, can really allow you to do a lot more with the data. And something that we are really keen to launch in the next few months is a GitHub repository, which will have scripts and documentation explaining how to use the API and how to create some of the visualizations that I've shown you here. We're also really interested in seeing what kinds of visualizations and analysis you can produce using the data as well. The API is freely available to everyone, and we really encourage you all to engage with it. This data, after all, really belongs to the entire sector, and we want you to be able to harness its strategic potential. So I'm going to wrap up shortly, but the final thing I just want to highlight to you all is how you can get involved. So if we've mapped your infrastructure, it's very likely that you have heard from us already. However, if you haven't heard from us and you can't find your infrastructure in our dataset, you can register an account with us to submit infrastructure. Our data collection up to this point has been manual, so there are definitely things that we've missed. I mean, as I said before, we're really aware that there's lots more that we want to capture. Although it's astounding how much we actually have found. I was not expecting to find nearly so much as we did. But anyway, at the very bottom of our homepage, we've got a button saying add your infrastructure under this banner saying get involved. If you click on this, you'll be, if you click on that and you're not logged in, you'll be taken to a registration page. Registering an account is really, really easy. All you have to do is provide your name and email address and then verify your email address. There is an approval process. We don't just allow anyone to become a registered user in order to protect the integrity of our data. However, if you have a UK university email address, you will be automatically approved. Also, I just want to stress that you don't need to be a registered user in order to access the data. You only need to register if you want to add or edit data. After you have created and verified your account, you can log in, and then you'll see any research infrastructure that you manage, and you'll be able to accept invitations to manage new ones. You will also be able to add new records. As a registered user, you will always be able to edit or delete your data and add new records at any time. There isn't a time limit on this. You're also very welcome to register on the website at any time, either now or in a few months' time. Again, there's no time limit. Should you later decide that you no longer wish your data to be part of our data set, you always have the right to opt out of the project. And I think that's it for me. Thank you all so much for listening to me and for your interest in this project. We really appreciate how enthusiastic many of you have been, and also your patience with us over the past few weeks as we've been helping many of you register and get started on the site. If you have any questions, problems, concerns, or suggestions about the site, please do get in touch with us at mapping@sas.ac.uk. Unfortunately, we're a rather small team, so we may take a bit of time to respond to your queries, but we're always really happy to help, and we really appreciate your feedback. Anyway, thank you so much again. I'm going to hand things back over to Jo.
Thank you so much, Megan. I think that gives you a sort of demonstration of of how the website can help you now, but also the ways in which we might use this website in the future. And that really brings us on to the discussion that we have this evening, because as I said at the beginning, this for us has been a real journey of discovery about our landscape, but it's also at the same time raised a whole series of questions about what the future should be for arts and humanities research infrastructure. How should it look 10 years from now? And so we thought, as part of tonight's event, and given that that's been one of the outcomes of the designing and devising the map, we thought that we would have a discussion around some of those possibilities. So it is a huge pleasure to welcome this evening Tao Chang, who's the Associate Director for Programs at the AHRC, Ariana Chula, who's the Director and Senior Analyst at the King's College London Digital Lab, and Leif Isaacson, who's Professor of Digital Humanities at the University of Exeter. And each have been asked to provide a 5-minute reflection or provocation, and we'll take a short discussion after that, but really to open up some of these bigger discussions around research infrastructure for our disciplines that the map invites us to consider. So Tao, can I turn to you first to kick us off?
Yeah, can you hear me now, Joe? Okay, sorry, I'm struggling with tech this evening. Okay, so my brief was to provide to give you a sort of 5-minute intervention, and I definitely fall into the provocation camp rather than the reflection. I will reflect to say this has been an amazing journey, and I think the data that has been captured is breathtaking in its breadth and diversity. And I would also say, huge thank you to Megan and yourself, Joe, for putting this together in a relatively short space of time. What are we going to do with it? So the view from the funder, and I'm speaking specifically from my brief, which is as Associate Director that looks after infrastructure and major programs, or IMPS. My first question is, we now have a data set. It's not quite comprehensive, but it tells us, and certainly is indicative of how the arts and humanities community or communities view their own infrastructure, what they see as being a research infrastructure, and what they see as that those research infrastructures doing. Having pulled together this data set, the funder is first of all interested in, because we always have to be, how is this particular resource going to be turned into a vehicle for change? Having invested in this particular, in the creation and curation of the map, and invited people to put their, to upload their information and to be mapped, and then have a visual on what the landscape looks like. What does that tell us about ourselves? It tells us that there's an awful lot out there. It also raises some interesting questions about whether everyone talks to each other or is even aware that they exist. I think I would be interested to hear from the SAS team and from the community, but more broadly, what can you tell me as a funder and as an organization that is constantly at the sharp end of questions from DCIT about the value of arts and humanities? And it's not just the value of arts and humanities as something that is important or good for the national conversation, but how can these infrastructures and these resources, how can they be brought together to present a collective voice? Now, when I first came into post at AHRC, I did attempt to define arts and humanities research infrastructure. I'm going to read it to you, and then I'll share the link. This was in an AHRC blog, and I said, that taken as a whole, arts and humanities research infrastructure is a national network of facilities, of technologies, of expertise and resource that connects arts and humanities researchers to each other, that connects them to the wider scientific community, and connects them to people, policymakers, business, and enterprise. I can see from this that we've made a start with showing us where we all are. I can see from this that we've made a start with at least allowing or enabling connectivity across different infrastructures and the people within them. But I would be interested in hearing from now on, as it were, here on in, how the information that is collected and the metrics can be translated into measures and metrics that strengthen the case for continued and increasing funding in arts and humanities research. So that is a key challenge for AHRC. I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Tao. I think we can certainly respond to some of that in the discussion that follows, but for now I'm going to turn to Ariana.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this launch, and indeed a milestone, I think, for our community. So I'll also go through some comments, reflections, and hopefully think also of the future. First of all, let me say that indeed, even if, as Megan and others outlined, that the map is obviously not complete and it has a lot of gaps and it needs to be complemented in many ways, I think it is really quite to be praised, the variety that the map showcases in terms of research infrastructure in the arts and humanities, and more in general showcases the arts and humanities best place to foreground an inclusive definition of what research infrastructures are. And in addition, to bring to the foreground the human element, as again has been mentioned, and to inform, I think, going forward, research infrastructure development with ethical principles of fairness and sustainability. Another element that I think is a cause for praise is, I think, the transparency of the project, the adoption of good practices, also in terms of web development and digital practices. So the fact that you're indeed using an API and you're hoping that your data will be used, the choice of design and development with attention to accessibility and so on. There are, however, of course, challenges. We know, for those of us that have been worked in this area for some time, we know that there have been previous mapping exercises in the past that have failed, either because they were not sustained, so lack of funding usually, but sometimes also because they were not maybe conceived in such a way that they could be sustained. So the workflows were not manageable. And I think in technical terms, we are nowadays in a much better position to mitigate some of these risks. For example, some of those best practices I just mentioned, and they were highlighted before, the use of APIs and so on, but ideally also mechanisms for data aggregation and federation that don't rely only on manual updates. But I think from the expertise that I can bring in, I also want to raise the awareness of data creation and data modeling and data visualization, and the importance on how to model data and also how to read data. So we know that the map is not the territory, but we also know that the map has a pragmatic functionality to take us somewhere. So to read and to kind of embed a strategy, we need to think carefully on how those data are modeled. So this is a call indeed of thinking, I think, in terms of some of those metrics and indicators and criteria that Tao is referring to. So for example, connections, how do we make sure that those nodes are actually also representing the connections? At the moment, for obvious reasons, you have to limit yourselves to identifying, for example, hierarchies within institutions. But and I noticed that at the moment in one of the visualizations, some of the societies and associations look like the most isolated nodes, but in actual fact, we know that most likely some of those associations are probably the most connected ones, because are already have members across different institutions and sometimes have not only a national but also an international remit. So there are ways in which definitely the way in which the data are connected and created can be improved to going towards a better strategy in terms of reading the data and therefore taking actions around that. In financial terms, I think we're also in a better position. This project specifically was funded, as you say, by Research England and the HRC, and we know the HRC has made a really important effort to investing in the area of research infrastructure, consulting with the community, and in turn making indeed the case for our community to UCRI, which is not to be underestimated indeed when we compete with STEM subjects in this area. But indeed, we do need to work together to improve the indicators, the metrics, the criteria. And I think, again, if I can speak mainly from the point of view of someone that is very much involved in sustaining, especially digital resources, we need to make sure that we consolidate and leverage on past investments that already have a national or international remit. And in that sense, make sure that we sustain those, first of all, and therefore that we highlight those investments that have already happened, and we find ways to sustain those. In terms of culturally, obviously, the most important challenge is still to continue to make sure that the arts humanities infrastructure feature in the map of national research infrastructure and continue to align with international efforts in that respect. And ideally continue to identify gaps. So in that sense, the mapping exercise remains vital for that to happen. Maybe just wanted to mention two more things. One, again, thinking of the expertise I bring in, I wanted to refer to the white paper published by the IDA steering committee that represents the research software engineering community, to highlight the importance of, again, the, if you like, human resources that sustain especially digital research infrastructure, and how we can make sure that those are supported and sustained so that some of these infrastructure continue to live and continue to thrive. And then maybe one last point around a roadmap. So if we want to make sure that indeed that the ecosystem looks not only more connected, but more consolidated going forward, we do need to have a roadmap and ideally a better strategy of integrating what we already have. And again, to me, the importance of alignment with international initiatives remains vital. And also, ideally, again, thinking more, if you like, of the digital element, making sure that the infrastructure we have can really address the challenges of modern times around AI, for example, better uptake of HPC, and areas that would, if you like, makes some elements of the map fly further in terms of addressing the research challenges of today. Yeah, that's my 2 pennies. Thank you.
I'm now going to turn to Leif.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much. Really a huge thank you for the invitation to join the panel, and also, yeah, to comment on the state of UK arts and humanities infrastructure, as well as also presenting this really wonderful project. So again, just kind of commenting here based on some questions that we were given in advance. First, about the strengths of the UK's arts and humanities infrastructure. So in my view, I think discovery and access to different aspects of the humanities, so source materials, expertise, tools, facilities, and so on, really are the underpinning element of all infrastructure. And that's because without them, all of those other components are basically less effective or useless, right? If you don't know that something is there, if you can't access it, then all of the other good stuff really doesn't help you very much. And I think on that basis is why initiatives that like mapping and the arts and humanities are so important. I think, therefore, it's kind of a good thing that those discovery and access really have improved enormously, particularly over the past decade. And that's due to both national and international legal and technical initiatives. That's had a huge impact, especially, I think, for those of us who were outside the Golden Triangle, where historically it was often much easier to avail yourself of different resources, facilities. I would still say that a lot of that is still institution dependent, and it's a really varied landscape. But the pace of that progress, of that change, really does show that it's possible, with investment, to make serious progress on these kind of issues. And we can, whilst noting that change, noting that progress, it's still really important to point out that the landscape is still quite fragmentary. There's parts which are really well covered, parts which aren't. it's disjointed and disconnected in places. And again, this project, I think, is doing great work in kind of pointing out, both where things are connecting, but also perhaps where those connections need to be created. And it's fragile, right? It can disappear quite quickly if we don't continue to support it. So then the question is, what do we need and where are the gaps in support? It follows from what I've just said that continuing to improve efficient discovery and access is arguably, in my view, the principal way to supercharge all of the different other aspects of research. And that often doesn't really seem sexy, I think, sometimes to funders, sometimes to researchers, but it really does strike me as fundamental. If I might be permitted to kind of poach from a comparison that Tao sometimes makes, sorry, Tao, but when astrophysicists create maps of the universe, I think all of us, including arts and humanities folks, really get behind that. We think, well, that's a really excellent investment in science, terrific way to spend some money, even when we know that most of what they're recording is literally empty void, right? We know there's lots of really important and interesting and valuable stuff within it. Lots of it they're kind of capturing is actually nothing at all. The arts and humanities, conversely, right, has collections across the country, and pretty much all of that stuff is interesting to somebody, whether it's researchers, whether it's local communities. So there's just amazing material and ideas that are out there, and again, making that available is really, really money and time that is well spent as a basis for so much other research that we can do. Publications, I think kind of published materials, obviously print, but also things like audio and film are much better served than they used to be. Obviously, there's still room for improvement, but collections, archives, tools, and expertise really are the next frontier. And again, this is why this project is so important. So the next stage, I think, is to invest in tools and infrastructure and staff to make the process of particularly digitally recording them or information about them, to make that discovery process much more efficient. It would also be interesting to see if we could have a kind of national push, a national mission that went beyond the EHEIs and the research organizations and the GLAMs to support that process, that also engages local communities, because it really could be an all hands process. So thinking about how we can join up our activities so that they can become more than the sum of their parts. Well, obviously, I'm showing my bias here a little bit as somebody who works in digital humanities, but in my view, training at all levels is essential because the technical integration of infrastructure is both expensive and fragile if we're just focusing on how can we kind of technically connect things, and it's really hard to scale. So what we really do need is across the board, not making everybody experts in everything, but I think there is an unfortunate and very long legacy within the UK and indeed elsewhere of treating sort of shape and STEM methodologies as really polarized fields of inquiry. And that means that very many, if not all, and I really want to emphasize not all, arts and humanities researchers sometimes feel that the kind of technical, the mathematical, scientific practices present a kind of, inaccessible skill sets that should be performed by other people, and vice versa, right? The folks on the other side often kind of think, feel the same way about A&H. Terms like interdisciplinary, I think have become increasingly problematic because they imply that in doing this, humanists are somehow adopting non-humanities methods. And I'd love to again see a concerted effort to blend the intersection of these fields or these zones of inquiry further, and seeing disciplines as being defined by the range of questions that they address, not the methods that they adopt, right? No one should be, again, expected to be an expert in everything, but there should be a broader and more inclusive range of views about what it looks like to be an arts and humanities researcher in the academic imaginary. So just to wrap up, finally, what next for infrastructure? Certainly, I think in 10 years, there's no reason why, say, all secondary and most primary resources, APIs, centers of expertise and or contact information for centers of expertise should be pretty much seamlessly available, right? I shouldn't spend what is currently the case, the many hours that I do knowing that something's probably out there and Googling around it and trying to find things and searching different databases just to kind of get to the article that it turns out wasn't actually the kind of I didn't need after all, right? So the technology to do that largely exists. It just needs the investment in digitizing those collections, and it's the technology. There are legal aspects of that as well, of course, but we can get there, and we have made progress. And then the second thing is obviously there's a bit of kind of flavor of the month, but until now we've been really dependent solely upon human created metadata, and as this project knows, that is very expensive and it is inherently very limited. So as a final kind of provocative thought, I think it would be, we really should look at leveraging AI for things like first pass, and I want to be kind of clear, AI isn't going to solve all these things, but first pass indexing, translation, and indeed mapping to find out what is salient across global scholarship, right? What are the, help me find those things that I can then, as an arts and humanities researcher, really kind of dedicate my brain power to. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all three of you for those interventions and provocations. I think probably just as a starting point, just to say, that we built this deliberately so that it is put on a sustainable footing and it becomes a kind of a live map that is owned by and created by from here on in the community. So we've done it so that you can do that. The second thing to note that it is something where we wanted to take a starting point of the things that are more hidden and less visible, but vitally important to our the way that we research and ideas are generated and so on. But it is also built in a way that can add new data that is already out there. So the format will allow us now to move into other phases of mapping, for example, all of the GLAM infrastructure, for example, other kinds of data. So it's there as that starting point, and the physical work of mapping what is more hidden was actually first important step. So maybe if I could sort of just come back to Tao's, one of Tao's first points about, well, what is this going to allow us to do? Now we're here, well, what do we do with it? And I think the first thing, and some of this was quite startling to us as we started to do the exercise of mapping, and the release of the map comes at exactly a very timely moment. The first is, of course, that with the government response to the nurse review last week, there will be a national plan for RDI infrastructure. So it is absolutely vitally important that arts and humanities feature in that. We did feature, of course, in fact, this project did feature in the GISC work on how we optimize research infrastructure, but really making sure that whatever research infrastructure is there, that is given a central role. It should be rightly interdisciplinary and interconnected, moving beyond a STEM-led definition of what infrastructure is. And Tao, your definition, I think, is really persuasive because it emphasized people and expertise in that. And that really is important. And it remains important to the arts and humanities research infrastructure. It is, of course, libraries, archives, data sets, but it's now also creative and maker spaces, it's digital humanities labs, it's performance spaces, it's studios, but it's also something that's less tangible, I think. And that is driven by networks, exchange, mechanisms that allow for collaboration, co-production, and it's really difficult to find them and know them. And I think then, for me, I think, first of all, it was very revealing just how much heavy lifting is done by QR in all of this and how vitally important that is. But I guess the bigger question really is, what this has revealed is that there is a lot of infrastructure. So I think there needs to be a more strategic approach to that regional and national collaboration and sharing, and how funding models really incentivize that. How do you join this up? And it may be that what we're looking at is unsustainable. So how do you put it onto a more sustainable footing then? How do you put those infrastructures and assets onto a more sustainable footing? And that may well be driven by consortia, collaborations, more effective sharing of costs and facilities, developing critical mass in different new ways. But I guess it starts with finding what's there. It starts with saying, okay, we now know that this actually exists. So it helps researchers to begin that process of how they join, but it also helps us as a national community to think that what is it that we actually need, and how might you make that, you know, far, far more than the sum of its parts. And I guess just one final thought before suggesting that the panel come back in is, I honestly think that the arts and humanities are really on the cusp of quite a radical transformation. You can see, you know, what is happening. And one of the really striking things about what this infrastructure is it's deeply interdisciplinary in its nature. You know, it's really hard to place, to disaggregate, and we don't want to necessarily disaggregate, but it's really hard to disaggregate what's uniquely arts and humanities and what actually serves a much more interdisciplinary purpose. But I think our agendas in arts and humanities are changing. The map reveals that quite profoundly. And Leif, coming back to your point, you know, will the intervention of AI demand a new approach actually to all of this, both in terms of what we collect, how we collect it, but also how we're operating, and what infrastructure are we going to need to support that radical transformation that is going on in the arts and humanities? Because, you know, it's not clear what that is. What will be the balance between physical and virtual infrastructure, and how do we build it, whatever it is going to be, so that it's more agile and can move in a much more flexible way with what will be very fast moving research demands. If you look at you know, how what has been built more recently, it's doing that. That shift is happening already, and emergent fields are coming out. They're breaking out of our traditional tags. Just tagging the project showed us actually, you know, do our tags work? Do our taxonomies work? And the infrastructure is already outpacing the taxonomy in an interesting way. So I think, Tao, it is that starting point. And so I just open it up maybe for some final comments, but they're just some initial views from what we've seen, and it surprised, you know, in many ways it surprised us what we found, and we'd liked the database to be used and the map to be used in ways that really do open up these questions and help us. So perhaps if I could just go back in reverse order, Leif, a couple of final comments, because I'm conscious we're up on time. Oh, you're on mute, Leif. Very quickly.
I don't. Remarkably for me, I don't know that I have anything, so I'll pass the. Unusual.
I think, Joe, you summarized really nicely that there are changes that are already happening. And I think maybe one final comment is that even if that picture that you showed in the dashboard showed a quite fragmented, potentially, view of universities, institutionally based map, in actual fact, institutions are working together already a lot, and there are a lot of networks out there. And so maybe that's the element that we need to really leverage on and showcase better in our map and in our data collection, whether it's done manually or ideally with the help of AI and other computational methods. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arianna. And finally, Tao.
I would reinforce what Arianna has said and what you were saying earlier, Joe. I think there are opportunities here for this as a data set, as a baseline, to use it as a kind of springboard. That's the other word of the evening, to see whether we can use the data, as it were, to create a new sort of picture or landscape of ourselves. If we fed all of this to an AI, what would the AI say to us about what the arts and humanities infrastructure and research landscape looks like at this point in time? It might give us utter nonsense, or it might surprise us again. So I think it's important to realize that in line with the response to the nurse review, there was another little piece of advice from the Council of Science, from the Prime Minister's Council of Science and Technology, which was looking specifically at how arts and humanities led or arts and humanities driven R&D, applied R&D, actually also creates spillover benefits for other sectors. And if there was one case where this might happen, it would be this resource.
Yeah.
So I think we do need to pick it up.
Yeah. Thanks, Tam.
Yeah.
And it's certainly our intention is now to build up out of this, so you get a much more comprehensive moving picture so that we can use it in exactly that way. Okay, that brings us to the end. Look, the final thing I want to say to everyone on the call is that this is your map. You know, we built it as a starting point. You own it as a community, and we're looking to you to populate it. It could be a vital piece of the puzzle for all of us in finding out what's there and tracking how our infrastructure is changing over time. So in order to be found and to find others, we're relying on you to make sure that you update the entries for which you're responsible. It's really easy. It's really light touch. We've built it that way, just so that it encourages you to use it. We'll be producing kind of use case studies over time. Some provocations are coming out of the kind of research element that's been running alongside the map. And we really hope that you use it. Please do. Please tell us if there are things that you would like to see as we go into developing this in new ways, because we have a commitment to the map that we want to see it flourish over many years. So if there are things now as we go into the future phases, we're always here, and we would like to know your views. But for now, thank you for joining us. Use the map. Put your infrastructure on there and help us to build and sustain the arts and humanities infrastructure of the future. But thanks so much to our panel, and most of all, thanks very much to the team who built it. You have done an extraordinary service for arts and humanities, and I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved, to Megan, to Jane Winters, to Louis, to the whole team who've been involved. Thank you so much, and have a good evening, and we'll look forward to hearing your views in due course.